The Dark River by Sylvia Plath. The woman who sat beside me on the park bench stared into the moving waters of the river flowing past the grassy bank. There was a dreaminess about her. Which fascinated me. Although her hair was white, there was a fluid youthfulness in her features and a strange, radiant light in her eyes. All about us was the misty green of spring, and the winding paths were bordered by a golden flutter of daffodils. Children were chattering at play, but in our corner of the park there was a little island of silence. At last, as if she sensed my curious gaze upon her, the woman stirred as though awakening from a hypnotic sleep and turned to look at me. The wild, exuberant brightness of her face was at once frightening and compelling. I think I lost myself in the depths of her eyes. "You were wondering about me," she said simply. Her frankness took me off guard. "Yes," I admitted. "I have had the words inside me for a long time," she began, "but they were not ready until today. You will be the first to know my story and that of the Dark River." Her voice flowed musically like the murmur of a quiet fountain. "As I recall my childhood," she went on, "I can see shapes move before me, clear, as if seen through glass, but their motions are so mechanical, their reactions as inevitable as those of figures in a dream. The park fades away, but the sound of the river is constant, and it forms the background of my reverie." Lulled by the languid voice of the woman, a scene strange and yet familiar materialized before me. There was a huge mansion on a hilltop, and there was desolation in its bleak metallic windows and its ivy-covered walls. The old-fashioned garden to the rear of the ancient house was bordered by a lilac hedge, and these leafy bushes leaned aslant over their reflections in a river. At first I did not see the child sitting motionless at the river's edge. So still was she and lost in dreams. She was an elfin creature, thin and graceful, with a long tangle of yellow hair. A storybook lay upon her lap. The voice went on narrating as the picture came to life. "You see, I was not a lonely child. Although I had no companions my own age, I was content to spend pleasant afternoons beside the river. The river was near me even then, but I did not understand its significance until a much later time. Deep within me there was rooted a love for the lilacs with their delicate fragrance, for the dark singing waters, and for the friendly sky. I lived in a world of fancy, but do not all children live so? There was a cool green place among the reeds where I liked to sit and watch the cloud patterns mirrored in the glassy black surface of the water. Sometimes the cloud reflections seemed to assume distorted human forms, but these images would quickly blend and change. The opposite bank of the river was always shouldered with a heavy mist, and I often longed to cross over to see for myself what mysteries were concealed in that never lifting fog. But there was no bridge, no boat, and the calm waters were at the same time forbidding and perilous. In a way, I was glad the mist was there. I felt sure that, veiled in the dense haze, all my unfinished thoughts and dreams lay waiting for an awakening. I feel a wave of sadness for that child. She is no longer I, but a solitary creature without a place in time, doomed forever to wander through the lonely hallways of my mind. The picture faded slowly and another took its place. This time it was the city. It was the spring of another year. The snows were melting and the winds were damp and warm. The door of an apartment house opened and a young girl came walking lightly towards us. I recognized in her the child that I had seen before. The voice continued. "That spring I met Colin. He was a part of the rain, a part of the breathless life unfolding everywhere. Sometimes I think he lived only in my mind. He emerged from the April gardens in the mists of morning, and suddenly he was beside me, and there was a full, complete feeling in my heart. His face was lean and sensitive, I remember. We did not talk much, for there was mutual awareness between us that required no feeble, inadequate words. There were long walks together down the avenue of spring, and we were one with the world around us. The lilacs were in bloom on the green ribbon of the lawn before the tall, dusty buildings. The park was fragrant and inviting. There was a lightness about our companionship that lasted for a while. I do not know when I sensed the first heaviness or when the dream world began to fade. But it came increasingly awkward to talk with Colin. I felt with sudden horror that he was drifting away from me. I tried to find an answer in his eyes, but they were dark and evasive. I longed to cry out to him, but the words were destined never to leave my lips. One afternoon, when Colin called for me at my house, I ran quickly down the creaking wooden stairs to meet him. As I glanced at his face, I felt a sudden chill, as if an icy wind had struck my heart, with an odd sense of impending doom, and I knew that this was the last time I would ever see Colin again. The old familiar walks in the park were almost deserted. It was very quiet. A haze arose from the humid earth. The sky was low with clouds. On either side stretched the lawns, the tulip gardens and the daffodils. A moist, earthly fragrance hung in the air, and there was the waiting, windless calm that comes before a rain. As we walked hand in hand, I felt nearer to Colin than I had for a long while. My fears began to vanish one by one. The spring had passed its first perfection, I noticed reluctantly, for already a few petals lay crumpled on the ground. The early golden tints were gone, and the deeper green of summer was approaching. Suddenly I saw that Colin was watching me strangely. We had stopped walking and stood facing each other on the gravel path. There was a desperate pleading in Colin's eyes for me to understand something that he could not tell me. The chill breath of foreboding touched me again, and then I heard it, the sound of a river rushing between us, dark and invisible, but more powerful than either of us. Why had I never noticed it before? Why had I never understood its meaning? The memories of my childhood flooded back, and with an awful clarity I realised that the mysterious black river of my youth would be with me forever, always withholding me from complete communication with those I wished to love. Colin read my eyes, and the terror mirrored there. "So you hear it too?" he said. Wordless, I nodded. Here the voice trailed off, but I no longer needed the woman to explain the picture or the words which now issued from Colin's lips. "You know why I brought you here?" he questioned softly. The rain poured down, and the girl's hair clung about her face in moist ringlets. Her white dress hung limp and wilted. She knew. She avoided his eyes because she could not meet that look of gentle pity. Goodbye, she cried out into the rain, and then turned and ran, leaving him standing there alone. It was good to run. As her feet thudded over the gravel path, the blood pounded in her ears and drowned out the sound of the river, which still echoed in her brain. Something pent up inside her broke, free and wild. Her hair flew out behind her as she ran, and her eyes were blinded by the warm, compassionate rain. She only glanced back once. He was still standing there, faintly outlined against the liquid green of the park, but even as she looked, the rain beat down harder, and he seemed to dissolve, to melt away like a phantom into the spring mists. There was no one to see her running down the deserted streets, no one to see her dash up the steps of the old apartment house and slam the front door behind her. The crash re-echoed through the empty hall as she flung herself onto the bed in her room. A long growl of summer thunder sounded in the distance. The spring was gone, but the river was with her forever. Even with her eyes closed, she could see the darkness, relentless waters flowing. The form of the young lady faded, and I found myself staring at the cloud patterns reflected in the river. Suddenly I recalled the woman beside me, but even as I looked up, I knew that she too would be gone, for she was part of the river, and the radiance in her eyes had only been the sunlight dancing on the surface of the water.